On in the Spitting Image, chapter 27, entitled Final Inspection. Miss Hagmaier heard the door creak before Leon set foot inside the classroom. "You're early," she snapped. She was kneeling before the supply cabinet, her arms shoved deep inside the pantyhose drawer. What is she fishing for? Leon wondered as he watched her root through the tattered, tangled hose. All of a sudden, she pulled something to the surface. It was the black binder. "Why aren't you still at the banquet?" Miss Hagmaier demanded. "Just wanted to check over my masterpiece," Leon said. "And while I'm at it, get a closer look at that binder," he thought to himself. "A bit late for that, isn't it?" Miss Hagmaier grumbled. She reached into another drawer and removed some translucent white cloth, which she pinned to her wig. Leon now had two reasons to stare at his teacher. "It's a wimple," Miss Hagmaier clarified, touching the delicate head cover. She shut the cabinet doors and replaced the padlock. "My one concession to carnival clothing." "Looks good," said Leon. "Skip the flattery, Mr. Zeisel. If you have things to check, get checking. Final inspections begin in exactly 7 minutes." Miss Hagmaier walked to the front of the room. Leon sat down and pulled a needle and thread from the cubbyhole of his desk. Before he tended to the doll, he propped up his medieval reader like a castle wall to block out unwanted attention. The leg gash was worse than he feared. Lumpkin's sidewinder had destroyed a seam that stretched from boot to buttock. The damage penetrated all 3 layers of the doll's leg: the liver-colored stocking, the skin of pale white cotton below it, and the pantyhose core. In fact, the wound went so deep that it exposed a small length of coat hanger bone. The doll wasn't the only one harmed. Leon had a nasty welt on his hand, compliments of Lumpkin's soup spoon. He ignored his own injury, however, and focused on the doll's. It was far more serious. Leon rewrapped the exposed leg bone, folded one edge of the white cotton skin over the other, and made a few overcast stitches just above the boot and checked his work. Not good enough, he decided. The pantyhose stuffing was pushed against the seam, spreading the stitches to unacceptable widths. Standard overcasting, Leon concluded, would never meet the Hagmaier minimum of 4 SPI. That meant figuring out a different method of repair. Leon cut the thread with his string ring, and started over. He was just pressing the 2 edges of cotton together. They reminded him of a pair of lips when Mr. Hankey passed by clanging his bell. "Finally," said Miss Hagmaier. "He's 3 minutes late." Lily Matisse and P.W. were the first to return from the banquet. They rushed straight over to Leon. P.W. placed the pouch and spit bottle behind the medieval reader. "You ran out of the lunchroom so fast you left these behind," he said. "Thanks," said Leon distractedly. He shoved the bottle into his desk. "So," said P.W., "have you lost power?" Leon bent the arms of the doll a couple of times and glanced over at Miss Hagmaier. "She's not responding," said Lily Matisse. "I know," said Leon. "For the moment, I'm getting 0 reaction." "But that could change, right?" said Lily Matisse anxiously. "Of course it could change," said P.W. Leon finished off a stitch and looked up. "We'll know for sure after I've finished the rip. After I've fixed the rip." "Will you be done by inspection time?" Lily Matisse asked. Leon sighed. "Not if I have to keep answering questions." "Got it," said P.W. "Ditto," said Lily Matisse. They let him get back to work. Pinching the material together with one hand while working the needle with the other, Leon tackled the repair with the intensity of a crackerjack surgeon performing a life-saving procedure. In fact, he was so busy tending to his patient, he didn't hear the class bell being called to order. He didn't hear the class being called to order. Miss Hagmaier silenced the students with a wave of her needle. "Apprentices and potential masters," she said, brushing the gauzy see-through wimple away from her face. "Our year together began when I wrote out the motto of a medieval master. A place for everything and everything in its place. 9 important words for 9 important projects." She aimed her needle at the counting house tally. "That timeline tells you the story of those projects, as well as my efforts to use them to turn all of you into masters. Today we will see if a year of discipline and diligence has paid off. When I call your name, approach the desk with your submission. If you wish, you may describe it, briefly. I will then conduct my inspection, which will conclude in the usual manner by the measurement of a seam. If the seam satisfies my SPI standards, I will declare you a master of the guild and will send you to the counting house tally with these snagglers." Miss Hagmaier tapped a giant pair of scissors. "Advance your spool to the end of the tally and use the snagglers to snip it free. Once you have done that, return the scissors to me and sit down with your spool and submission." "Does that mean that we get to keep our masterpieces?" Lily Matisse asked. "I said no such thing, Miss Jaspro," Miss Hagmaier said. "Now let's begin. Breed, Antoinette." Antoinette stood up and faced the class. My masterpiece by Queen Antoinette. My masterpiece is an Irish wolfhound. She held out a stuffed dog with a glittery rhinestone collar. Irish wolfhounds are the most regal dogs in the world. Gentle when stroked, fierce when provoked. That's their motto. They were introduced, and Leon tuned out. For the first time all year, for the first time in his entire life, he was happy his last name started with Z. It gave him more time to work. Antoinette's wolfhound passed with a stitch count of 7 SPI. PW's masterpiece, a 3-headed dragon, got approved with a respectable 6. Lily Matisse presented a jazzed-up winter rabbit with tie-dyed lavender ears. Miss Hagmaier criticized the bunny's flamboyance, but felt compelled to okay it since its stitch count measured a 9, more than twice the minimum. Even Henry Lumpkin earned the title of master for a 5 SPI pit bull made from material that matched his olive drab army jacket. 17 animals passed under the tape measure. 17 masters entered the guild. 1 submission remained. "Zeisel Leon," said Miss Hagmaier. Leon slipped his masterpiece into its pouch, lowered the medieval reader, stood up, and approached the front of the room. He was unsure whether the doll's loss of signal power was temporary or permanent, but he decided not to take any chances. He gingerly loosened the drawstring on the pouch and pressed up from the bottom until the head of the doll poked out like a push-pop. Then he peeled down the pouch, careful not to touch the doll inside. As soon as he deposited the masterpiece on Miss Hagmaier's desk, he cleared his throat and said, "We've been told that it's the job of an apprentice to make a masterpiece worthy of a master. Well, that's what I've tried to do." The big Miss Hagmaier took one look at the little Miss Hagmaier and instantly started to shake. But Leon, it's me! No, Miss Hagmaier, Leon corrected firmly. It's your spitting image. The doll knocked the stuffing out of Miss Hagmaier as effectively as Lumpkin had knocked the stuffing out of the doll. It took her nearly a minute to recover. Once she inspected the masterpiece with an odd, almost greedy silence. Her bony fingers and beady gaze traveled over every nook and cranny of the doll, from wig to boots. The eyes on the doll, all four of them, attracted her attention first, and then the cape. But it was the black lace-ups that most intrigued her. She was impressed that Leon had tied the laces just like hers, with double rabbit ears and a safety knot added for good measure. Naturally, her fascination fascinated the class. Everyone leaned forward to watch Miss Hagmaier inspect. Miss Hagmaier. Would she lift up the hair and check out the mushroom-shaped ears? Would she remove the miniature wig? The life-size Miss Hagmaier disappointed her students by avoiding both noteworthy features of the masterly work. But was it masterly? Leon still didn't know. Miss Hagmaier said nothing, not a word, after her initial stuttered outburst. She focused all her attention on the doll. That made Leon antsy. Eventually, she placed the doll face up on the desk and said, I suppose it is time to take a measure of the masterpiece and its maker. She fiddled with the doll's stockings to expose the seams. He looked on silently, relieved she was ignoring the spit stain on the clothes. Still, he knew he wasn't off the hook. As the whole class watched, Miss Hagmaier pressed her tape measure against the freshly repaired leg. Recording the results on her clipboard, she muttered something Leon couldn't quite catch. It sounded like she had called his work uneven. Huh? He said. We do not say ha in my class, Mr. Zeisel. We say excuse me. Excuse me? Said Leon. Did I do something uneven? Uneven? Miss Hagmaier gave him a puzzled look. What was she trying to pull now? Leon asked himself before he said, Didn't you just say my seam was uneven? No, Miss Hagmaier replied. I did not. Oh, I said 11. 11 what? Leon asked quizzically. Stitches, Mr. Zeisel. Your seam, or should I say my seam, measures 11 SPI. 11? Shouted Leon. Yes, Miss Hagmaier said, as the class erupted in cheers. She picked up the snagglers and presented them to Leon, tips down. Now go and claim your spool. So it was official. The class klutz had passed inspection, and he had done so with top marks. Leon couldn't wait to tell Napoleon and Frau Haffenreffer and Maria. He especially couldn't wait to tell his mom. He marched over to the counting house tally. 17 sliced strands of yarn hung to the side like a mop of orange hair. One strand still stretched across the chart. Leon pushed his spool to the far right of the yarn and cut it free with the snagglers. He caught the spool, dropped it into his pouch, and headed back for his doll. May I please have my masterpiece, Miss Hagmaier? He said as politely as possible. Miss Hagmaier didn't respond. She was still marveling over it. Miss Hagmaier? Still no reaction. Leon decided to take charge. He tugged the doll out of Miss Hagmaier's hands and gently clutched it in his arms. And then, before Leon knew it, Miss Hagmaier was clutching him. At first, Leon thought the brace was intentional, on purpose. By the time he realized what was actually happening, that the doll had been reactivated, it was too late. The whole class oohed as Leon struggled to free himself. It wasn't easy. To peel Miss Hagmaier off his body, he had to wrench the doll away from his chest. But to wrench the doll away from his chest, he had to peel Miss Hagmaier off his body. After a good bit of squirming, Leon managed to pry the doll away. Miss Hagmaier let go of him moments later. The class quickly figured out that their teacher was out of commission, though not the reason why. "Hey, Haggy," Lumpkin shouted, "want to wrestle?" "Shush," Antoinette told him, "she'll hear you." But of course, Miss Hagmaier didn't hear Lumpkin, or anyone else, not while Leon was holding the doll. Lumpkin's challenge tempted Leon. It would have been sweet to make Miss Hagmaier body slam him against the supply cabinet, but Leon resisted the impulse. He had other plans. Chaos reigned supreme in the classroom. Masterpieces flew through the air. Swords smacked against shields. Even Antoinette misbehaved, humming all 4 stanzas of Miss Hagmaier Had a Hairpiece while waving her tiara in the air. Leon took advantage of the medieval mayhem to check in with PW. "Looks like we're back in business," he said. PW grinned. "Looks like it." He tapped his pocket. "The crowning apparatus is fully operational. Commence launch sequence whenever you're ready."